and welcome back to Misty Mountain Gaming. I'm the D&D wannabe. My name is Rob. Rolling dice is fun, right? It's what makes D&D a game. That little element of leaving things to chance. That little lump that jumps into your throat when you are about to try something a little bit risky, knowing that this little random number generating device holds in its hands the fate of your character, your party, and sometimes the entire world. But rolling dice can also be kind of a divisive element of the game. Some people like it a lot more than others. Some will proudly boast that they went an entire session without rolling a single d20, while others will take any flimsy excuse to roll one of these bad boys. Truth is, the best that this game has to offer is somewhere in the middle. Today, we're going to be discussing why we roll dice, when it's appropriate and when it's inappropriate. Now, this subject matter is largely subjective. Every table is different, and I'm not here to tell you that what you're doing is wrong. What I am going to try to do is share with you what has worked for me through my years of experience, share how I think the game wants to be played based on reading through many adventures and source books, and give new dungeon masters a policy that they can apply at their table. Are you ready? Let's begin. Okay, let's start off with a little philosophy. What do dice really do for us in Dungeons & Dragons? Well, they are impartial, simple little probability-generating machines. When something happens in D&D that could go one of many different ways, these little guys, along with some basic arithmetic, tell us what happens. If the Dungeon Master decided for themselves how everything would go, it wouldn't be a very fun game. And if the players decided that everything that they tried succeeded, it wouldn't be much of a story. That's what the dice are for. They're to add drama to the game, and drama to the experience of playing the game as well. Everyone who spent a little time playing D&D knows that feeling of holding on to that d20 just a little longer than usual, knowing that a lot is riding on this one, and holding their breath until the die stops rolling and their character's fate is sealed. Now, you could roll the dice quite often, leaving as much of the game as possible to chance in order to make it unpredictable, dramatic, and maybe a little chaotic? But we'll discuss how sometimes that's just not realistic or practical. You could swing the other way too, and roll the dice hardly at all, maybe never, in order to reward good role play and player creativity. That approach may work, but it also could lead down a path of partiality, where the Dungeon Master becomes preferential to certain roleplay approaches or maybe even players in order to get the outcomes that they envision. Then there's what Chapter 8 of the Dungeon Master's Guide refers to as the middle path. Here, the DM is free to permit certain courses of action to succeed or fail based on practicality, and to leave the outcomes of reasonably possible attempts to chance, free from bias or partiality. To me, I feel like this is the sweet spot where the game really shines. So, to that end, I devised my own policy for my table when it comes to dice. We roll dice to determine the outcome of dangerous or opposed actions, or when the attempt could result in multiple degrees of success or failure. That's going to be our rule going forward. If the action doesn't meet that criteria, we don't touch the dice. Let's start by focusing on when it is inappropriate to roll, or when an action doesn't meet our established criteria. If an action is neither dangerous, opposed, or risky, there's no need to roll. Let's say that a character wishes to walk across a room. Should they roll? No, of course not. This is a hyperbolic example that is gratuitously easy to do. Sure, they could stub their toe or trip and fall or something clumsy, I suppose, but it is so unlikely that there's no need to get the dice involved. Similarly, there is no particular outcome where it could be done more successfully. Walking across a room is just walking across a room. But let's shift slightly and say that that same character is now descending a flight of stairs. Should they roll? No, still no. Clearly not. But what if it were a terribly long set of spiral stairs, and there's a 100-foot drop just on the other side of the banister? Still no. It's still just walking down a flight of stairs. There's no danger inherent to descending a stairwell that is well constructed, even if it is proximate to a dangerous drop. Yes, I see. But what if this same stairwell were part of an old ruin, and the stairs were crumbling and the banister rotted? Absolutely! Yes! It is perfectly reasonable to think that someone might easily get hurt in a situation like that. And any mistakes they make could make passage more difficult for any party members trying to follow behind, because steps might become dislodged or break with their passage. Now, these are clearly hyperbolic examples, but the principle is sound. Simple tasks with little to no consequences aren't fun to roll for. If your character has to roll and risk failing for even the most mundane of tasks, they eventually will, and that's going to be embarrassing for the character and for the player, and won't be much fun for anyone. A good rule of thumb to follow is that if a character attempts something that you do in your daily life often without consciously considering the risks, there's no need to roll. Also, I say that if a task would be considered very easy or easy, meaning that if I as the Dungeon Master would typically set the DC to succeed at this task as 10 or lower, we don't roll dice. Along this vein, Chapter 8 of the Dungeon Master's Guide introduces the optional rule of automatic success. The idea behind this rule is that if a character attempts an ability check or skill check where the DC for success is 5 or more lower than the relevant ability score of that character, the attempt automatically succeeds. This prevents such unrealistic scenarios as the super strong barbarian repeatedly attempting to break down the door, but rolling poorly and not managing it, and then the party wizard comes up and rolls hot one time and completely shows them up. If this sounds interesting to you, check out this variant rule. Just be warned that overuse of this variant rule can lead to some predictability in your game, as well as some metagaming shenanigans. You can also determine success or failure without bringing dice into it by relying on a creature's passive score in a relevant skill. A passive skill score is representative of a character's average ability to complete a certain type of task, as well as their likelihood to succeed without even really trying. In our last video, we talked a lot about passive perception skill scores, so if you're curious about how that kind of thing works, go back and watch that video. Okay, now I feel like this should go without saying, but let's cover our bases here. Another time when rolling is inappropriate is when the task that a character, usually a player character, wishes to attempt is impossible. But Rob, this is a fantasy game. Anything is possible. No, stop that. The game still needs to be believable, even in a fantastic setting. If a fighter with a 16 strength wishes to pick up a castle, they can't do it. No rolling required. It doesn't matter what they roll. There's not a number high enough on this die to make that possible. No, not even a natural 20. Punching through the stone wall of a fort with your bare hands? No. Knowing a closely guarded secret of the universe when you've spent your entire life up till now in a quiet little farming community? No. Being able to leap tall buildings in a single bound? Not without the help of some spells or magic items? No. Look, because this is a fantasy game, there are things that in real life would be difficult, unlikely, or flat out impossible that should be possible in D&D. But not everything. Some things should be rolled for. Some things should not. I'm sorry, bards. not every dragon is going to be into you, no matter what your charisma score is or what you roll. Maybe you're just not this dragon's type. Alright, so those are all examples of when not to roll, and ways that we can determine success or failure without getting the dice involved. So when do we roll? Remember, round here, we use dice to determine the outcome of dangerous or opposed actions, or when the attempt could result in multiple degrees of success or failure. So what do we mean by that? First, the obvious. Combat. Virtually everything that happens in combat is dangerous. Attacking, making saving throws, casting spells, shoving, hiding, all have a chance to succeed or fail based on your strengths and the strengths and talents of your opponents. Pretty much everything that you do when someone nearby wants you dead is dangerous and generally opposed. Furthermore, almost everything that can be done in the context of battle has degrees of failure and success. How much damage do I do? Did I miss? Did I hit? Did I crit? Was I consumed by the gout of flame from the enemy spellcaster, or was I able to dive out of the way of the worst of it? Or did I manage to escape damage entirely? So yeah, pretty much everything that happens in combat is gonna need dice. But what about outside of a combat scenario, when the most common thing that you're gonna be rolling is skill checks? What then? Taking what we said earlier, most skill checks tick off that third category. Attempts that could result in multiple degrees of success or failure. Let's set the scene a little bit and give you a specific example. Let's say that my character, a skilled acrobat, is pursuing a thief across the rooftops of the city. Many of the buildings are quite close together, and given my talents, I'm able to bound between them without issue. But now we approach something that is outside my comfort zone, an unusually long leap to the roof of a derelict whose roof is somewhat in disrepair. Now the thief makes the leap, but struggles to find their footing on the loose shingles and the steep incline, slowing their escape somewhat. Now is my chance. I let out a roar as I fling myself over the gap. And the dungeon master asked me to make a Dexterity Acrobatics check. This is appropriate given the circumstance, because there's several ways that this could go. First, I could clear the gap and find my footing on the opposite roof, much as the thief had done. This means that while I don't slide backward and plummet to the ground several stories below, I'm no closer to catching the thief than I was before the jump. The chase continues. Maybe I make the leap to the roof, but don't manage to find my footing after all. I slide back to the edge of the roof and prevent myself from plummeting by grabbing onto the edge of the gutter. I'm safe, but the thief will probably escape me. Or I could land on that rooftop without breaking stride and catch up to the culprit while they're still struggling. And yes, I could fail entirely, miss the rooftop and plummet several stories below, allowing the thief to escape and probably severely injuring myself in the process. This is where rolls matter most in my mind. Let's say the Dungeon Master had mentally set the DC for this particular leap at an 18, more than a moderate amount of difficulty. If I roll an 18 or better, I manage to make the leap and continue my pursuit of the thief. Success. But if I fail the check, something's going to go wrong, and the thief's chances of escaping me are going to increase. And if I fail badly, say by failing the check by 5 or more, then I'm not going to make the jump at all. I'll fall, take plenty of damage, and the thief is going to escape me entirely. But if I can exceed the DC for the check by 5 or more, I can succeed with style. I can land sure-footed on this roof and overtake the thief while they're still struggling with the uncertain terrain and apprehend them. I can fail badly, fail, succeed, or succeed fantastically. Since there are multiple states of success and failure, it's best to leave the outcome to chance. Now, you'll probably find that most dungeon masters like skill checks to be binary. You either succeed as well as you can possibly succeed, or fail as poorly as you can possibly fail. The game can be played that way. It's a little less dramatic, but it certainly works. I'll mention here that some dungeon masters enjoy the concept of failing forward, popularized by other role-playing games. Using our previous example, let's say that I rolled a 17. That is a failure, but not a terrible one. My dungeon master describes that I land successfully on the roof, but immediately begin to slide backward as I lose my footing. As I do, the rapier at my side gets snagged on the claw of a stone gargoyle at the roof's edge. I'm safe. But now I'm faced with a decision that I otherwise wouldn't have had to make. Do I halt my pursuit and free my weapon? Or do I extricate myself from my belt scabbard and primary source of damage to continue my pursuit? Yes, I failed. But I failed in a way that has the potential to keep the story moving. At a cost. And a cost that I'd rather not have to pay. This was my father's rapier, after all. The final circumstance when rolling is always appropriate is when two or more creatures are actively and directly opposing one another with their actions. Take, for example, grappling. One creature is trying very hard to grab another creature, and the other creature is trying very hard not to get grabbed. Who gets their way? Well, the one that rolls better, and has the better modifiers to that type of check. Or when one creature is searching for another, and the other is trying their best to stay hidden. One rolls perception, one rolls stealth, and may the best man win. Or when one creature tells a convincing lie, and another creature is suspicious. One rolls deception, one rolls insight, and the dice decide how the story goes from there. Same goes for shoving a creature, arm wrestling, drinking contests, a battle of the bands, or two advisors each trying to sway the will of their sovereign. Any time that two forces meet in direct opposition, dice will roll. That's it, guys. That's the video on when to roll. You know, as I was getting this video ready for y'all, I recognized that I mentioned difficulty class a lot. That'd probably be a good topic for a future video, you think? Be sure to let me know if you're interested in the comments below. While you're down there below the video, be sure that you subscribe to the channel so that you know when new content comes out. And if you want to know the minute it comes out, be sure to ring the bell so that you get that notification. And while you're down there, if you could go ahead and press the little like button for me, I'm sure it would mean a lot to him. He's been feeling a little lonely down there. As usual, if this just isn't enough me talking about D&D for you, be sure to check out the podcast that me and my brother have, Bardic Twinspiration, for more of the same, just longer. And I hope to see you over at our Twitch channel, Misty Mountain Streaming, for some more D&D fun very soon. And until then, friends and adventurers, farewell and Godspeed. Today, we're going to be discussing why we roll dice, when it's appropriate and when it's inappropriate. Now, this subject matter is largely subjective, every table is different, and I'm not... Today, we're going to be discussing why we roll dice,